Hello, everybody. Hassan here, engineer, MBA, and investor. And in today's special video, we have something really, really special here for you guys. I'm here on a live interview with Gene Investing with Anthony. And Anthony is a huge, huge person in the community of CRISPR. I mean, on X.com. I remember Anthony when he had just a couple of subscribers. Anthony, I think you had like less than 100 followers on X. I remember like a few years ago, and I kind of remember how that was at that time. And now I don't know how many followers you have now, probably uh, 10 times more than me, but I don't even look at these things anymore. But I'm really, really happy to have Anthony. So, Anthony, thank you so much for joining here on this channel.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I know we've been talking about doing this team up for a while.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of been tough on my end with scheduling and everything with traveling and I know you suggested that like I think earlier this year actually. So we should have done that earlier, but it's all good. Here we are, and hopefully it's gonna be one of many because there's a couple of things I want to drill down into with NTLA and and I think there's so much that we talk about on X.com that a lot of times like people kind of like you see all these posts from different individuals, people that are actually well respected in the biotech space, and there's a lot of misinformation, I think, and it's not just for NTLA or even CRISPR, it goes through every vertical. So what I'm kind of hoping to do in this video at least is kind of go through the basics of NTLA Therapeutics, talks about the basics of each of their two leading programs and kind of build on top of that. And like I said, maybe in a future video go really, really deep. But we'll see how far we get. So before we get that, Anthony, like, do you want to maybe like give a quick intro? Like, how did you get in this space? Like, how do you got in the CRISPR landscape? Because I don't even know how you got in this space.
Yeah, so I joined the stock market around 2016. Um, I had always been kind of a saver and things like that, but that was the first time I really jumped into actual specific stocks. Um, didn't really have biotech stocks. I had one. It was, and I didn't even keep it very long. So most of the time I had stocks like Apple and Facebook, Nike, a few other things. But really, when Tesla, so what happened with Tesla was I wanted it right at the bottom, right when it hit 30 billion market cap, which was like pretty much the exact bottom. I think it was 179 before any stock splits. That was so that people think about 179 now and they think, oh, that's not that different than the price today. But this is before any of the stock splits, a 30 billion market cap. And I was so cheap that I didn't pay for the Robinhood Gold. And back then, if you didn't do that, sending the money took 48 hours to be able to use it.
That's
They've
insane.
changed.
40 out of
Yeah, yeah,
That's
pretty
crazy, man.
much. Yeah, so I sent for the money. I can't remember the exact amount I was going to buy. It wasn't crazy, but it was maybe $10,000 worth or something. Um, and I haven't checked recently, but I know that's gone up. I think it's over a trillion right
Yep.
now, the company,
Yep.
maybe. So, you know, that would be up over 30 times. But what was funny is the very next day when the money actually did trigger to the account, the stock went up 10% to like 200. And I was like, oh, I'm not paying 10% more than what I wanted.
Yeah.
So keep in mind this is going from 30 billion to 33 billion, like in a 24-hour period. And I said, screw that. I wanted it at 30 billion. And the rest is history. But I kind of told myself, you know, I'm not going to miss out on the next important big idea, and that was CRISPR. And I got started with CRISPR, CRSP. I had that one for quite a while. before all the bubble, and I don't know exactly, maybe 2018 was the first time I dabbled in it. Um, and I was in all of them before the bubble, so I've been in them for a while. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
So when you got into space, so did you start with CRISPR Therapeutics specifically because
Yeah.
of the technology, or was it just I just wanna like 10x my money and I see ARK Invest buying CRISPR, and did you even know ARK Invest was buying CRISPR? Like, what was the thesis at the time?
When I first got in, I didn't even know about ARK Invest because I think it was before they came on CNBC like every day talking about their Tesla. Um, so no, I just really liked the technology and the ability to cure people and one time, you know, future of medicine is really what I feel like that is. It's a lot more complicated as we've seen over the last 4 years, but I still really believe in it.
Yeah. And the reason why I'm asking is because a lot of us, including myself, actually got in CRISPR because of ARK Invest. Like I remember 2020 was the first time I started studying CRISPR like in depth. I heard about it before, obviously, but like studying it in
Mhm.
depth, watching videos, the limited videos we had, that was thanks to ARK Invest. But that's kind of insane that you got involved before that. That's pretty impressive. But let me ask you this though, like fast forward 2021, um, I'm presuming you invested and researched NTLA around that time or even before potentially.
Yeah, I was in Intelia before it made the move. Um, it was still higher than it is today, of course, because we're at all-time lows in that stock. But I don't know the exact price I first bought, but it was way before that crazy $200. It was way before $100. It might have been. It's probably under $50.
Man, I remember 2021 June. I remember when they released that data, the first set of data for their in vivo program. At the time, I still remember that stock went up 50% in a single day. And I remember on Twitter at the time, it was called Twitter, obviously, everyone was going crazy. That was a insane moment in the CRISPR space. I still remember that. My videos were getting a bunch of views. It was kind of insane. Um, which is kind of crazy because it was 4 years ago, literally 4 years ago now. Um,
Mhm.
and it's kind of insane how, there's so much data now that came out from all these CRISPR companies, including Antilia Therapeutics, but the stock price, obviously, to your point, it's all-time lows, right? I was looking at it, it's like 90+% down since its peak. It's kind of insane when you think about it, right?
Yeah, a lot of people want to go. It hit 202. I remember it very well because it was June 2021 when Intelia hit its high. I think CRISPR hit the high about 6 months before that, at the end of 2020, around the time that the Nobel was awarded to Doudna and Charpentier. Um, so yeah, it's been 4 years for Intelia from the high and 4.5 for CRISPR. So it's crazy. You don't want to compare to those prices because that it was a bubble. It was like free money with the interest rates, right? But this is like an inverse bubble. This is the opposite,
And also, we
in
were
my
coming out
opinion.
of the pandemic. We're coming out of the pandemic. If I remember, like there was a lot of hype for Moderna, all these companies. And I still remember I was doing like summer walks, and I still do summer walks, like podcasts, where I just listen to podcasts and I walk around the city. But in 2021, I was still in Montreal. And I remember there were a bunch of podcasts about like CRISPR is gonna like change the whole world like next few months, which I believe it will change the world, but maybe not next few months in 2021. The hype was kind of crazy at the time, but to your point, I don't think we should be, like looking at that
I,
price stock and then kind of
I think
assessing it.
that's one of the biggest issues with these companies is the fact that everyone expects perfection. Everyone expects they're going to cure every single person perfectly, and then you have to be perfectly safe also, which is ridiculous. Like someone that I always talk to on X, they said they have to be not just as safe, but safer. And that's completely false. Like you don't have to be better and safer. I mean, it makes no sense, but you know,
Yeah, there's a lot of people on X that's
yeah,
anyways, we're not gonna throw names, but it's an interesting space.
yeah.
I say that, and we're gonna jump into NTLA right away after what I'm about to say, but um, I say this a lot, and I'm sure you've seen me say it on X or even on my videos. Like everything in a bear market, everything negative is amplified, right?
Hmm.
Like everything negative, right? And I remember people were saying, like, just a few months ago, I remember people saying, well, Antilia is gonna go bankrupt. Like
Oh
I
yeah,
remember reading that. I was like, man, these
they
guys
have
have
zero
like,
debt,
yeah, I
zero
mean,
debt.
zero debt. These guys have what, $1 billion cash? Like maybe a little bit less.
It's definitely it's down to 707,
Okay,
seven hundred
707.
seven million.
Okay, I mean, like, how do you go bankrupt with that much money with no debt? I mean, you don't, right? That's the nature of it.
You'd have to have a big major problem with safety that makes these drugs not get approved. If they get approved, which as long as there's no safety event, they're going to get approved just because of the efficacy is, off the charts, and that's not going to change. The efficacy, that's the thing. These drugs aren't like other drugs. They should get a higher multiple, not a lower multiple, just because once you see what they do in humans, that's not going to change for other humans
Agreed. Agreed.
for the most part.
So for Antilia Therapeutics, like how would you like, for example, let's say I don't know anything about NTLA, I'm just dabbling in this space. I kind of watch some documentaries on Netflix or HBO, those CRISPR documentaries, and I'm like, okay, well, I want to invest in this space. I'm looking at NTLA. Like, how would you start to describe the company? Like, what would you go about it? Obviously, they have their two leading programs. Like, how would you describe like the basics for that com those NTLA, specifically NTLA, for what they're doing and everything about their leadership and so on. How would you go about describing that?
So, obviously it's one of the original CRISPR companies. It is what most people call CRISPR 1.0, unlike Beam, which is the 2.0 CRISPR, and Prime Medicine is the 3.0. So it does have limitations. But as we've seen, companies like Big Pharma are trying to do CRISPR without even, there's Tessera, there's all kinds of companies, private and not private, that are pretty much copying these things, and they'll end up paying fees down the line for rights, for patents and things like that. But um, yeah, I think it's most people think of CRSP, right? Because it's in the name, CRISPR Therapeutics, CRISPR technology. That was my big one for the longest time, but I just realized well before the approval, like it was going to be very slow. Um, there was someone on X that I used to be a really big CRISPR bull, who talked about, oh, they're going to treat 1 billion people, with sickle cell. And it's like, that's not how, it's not in vivo. It takes like 6 to 9 months to treat a person. It comes with chemo, where we've seen people die from the chemo. Um, you're not going to get this as a sickle cell patient unless if you have a very severe case of sickle cell. Um, so I noticed all of those things, and I really want to get more on the in vivo side, which is when you do the CRISPR directly into the body instead of ex vivo like Casgevy for sickle cell. Um, and Intelli is the leader on the planet for in vivo. They have 3 phase 3 pivotal trials uh, currently ongoing. And the rest of the world, all of the CRISPR companies, which there's many if you count China, and they have zero. No one else in the world has a pivotal trial for in vivo CRISPR medicine, and that's a big deal. The bears talk about, they try to compare to the Roctavian, which is a hemophilia um, drug that had a lot of problems with getting revenue and things of that nature. Very different because it's a gene therapy. It has viral like AAV delivery, which is a lot more expensive. It's a lot harder to manufacture. It comes with a lot more safety problems. This is non-viral, which is huge. It's a 2 to 4 hour outpatient drip. It's very simple, and people forget all that. And the margins are going to be crazy. The over 95%.
That's insane. 95%. I've seen you say that a couple of times.
Yeah,
I was like,
the
man, that's
CEO, the CEO said that, and that's 95% rather immediately. He says once it's up and ramped up, it's going to be higher than that.
yeah. And we covered that actually in one of our videos. I remember there's I think it was from your thread actually. It was from your thread. You reposted a couple of things and I played the
Mhm.
pod. It was from a podcast episode, I think, that where the CEO spoke about it. It's kind of
Yeah,
insane, to be honest. Yeah. So, okay, so they have two leading programs, right?
3 programs, 3 drugs, or sorry, 3 programs, 2 drugs, because 2 of the pivotal phase 3 trials use the exact same drug for 2 different.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So, dates wise, like obviously in their
Mhm.
press release, they mentioned the business update, quarterly update. They're aiming for 2027, 2028 commercial launches respectively. Would you say
Yeah, so HAE fairly certain if things go according to plan, which they appear to be because the phase 3 enrollment they just brought in 3 months because originally they said it was going to be completed the 60 patients by the end of the year, and now
yeah,
they're saying by Q3, which is really impressive because that means they're going to fully enroll that phase 3 trial within 7 to 9 months in its entirety, which really goes to show patients want this, unlike what some people on X say. Um,
yeah,
so yeah, the timetable, it's sometime in first half 2027 is the current expectation that their first approval will occur for HAE.
right. And if we just stick with HAE for now, like that,
Mhm.
would you say right now in the landscape, forget about just CRISPR, just in general, is there any functional cure for HAE?
No, yeah,
Right.
no, I mean, most of the stuff requires tons of injections, multiple times a month. Um, the leading drug is from Takeda, and I forget exactly how many injections that requires, but it's a lot, and it's like $500,000 a year, um,
That's a lot of money,
which
500K a year, and it's not even a one-time functional cure.
that's what I say. But you know what people reply to me. They're like, "Oh, CRISPR's more expensive." Okay, for one time, and HAE patients get diagnosed around 20 or young. So, I mean, these people can live 60,
Right.
maybe 70, 60, 70 years. A lot of these people are going to live from their diagnosis, and they're trying to save 500, and obviously drugs go off exclusive. They go to generic and things like that. So it's not like someone would have to do 500,000 for 60 years, but still, it's a good deal, and we'll see how the data comes out. I'm very confident it will improve even more.
So about the data itself, like what are we seeing with the data so far with HAE, like for their NTLA, the 2002 program, like what are you seeing? Like, are you like this is gonna like if obviously we're not the FDA, but if I was the FDA and I'm looking at what NTLA is presenting in 2026 and 2027, like what do
Mhm.
you think I should feel about that as an FDA person? Like, am I looking at that data? I'm like, this is kind of insanely good, or this is like Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah,
Like, what do you think?
there's there's zero chance, in my opinion. I mean, you don't want to guarantee something and jinx it, but in terms of the efficacy, it's going to be approved. I mean, there's little question of that. Um, the you just want to avoid more of these liver elevation types of things, especially if one, God forbid, was worse, and didn't didn't alleviate on its own. Um, as long as safety continues the way it's at, it's going to be a slam dunk on in terms of approval.
Well, see, that's why I'm asking that question, right? Because to me, it's like it's just a matter of time, right? It's not even how
Yeah,
do you go like going back to that statement, the ridiculous statement that I saw on X like a couple of months ago that NTLA is going to go bankrupt. How do you go bankrupt with zero debt, with this much cash in the balance sheet, and with a program that's delivering amazing data? To me, that's amazing data. Because if you tell me there's zero, and that's obviously your opinion, you're not guaranteeing it, but is there zero chance that the FDA looks at it, it's like, yeah, that's not good enough. And to me, how do you go bankrupt? Like, what's like to me, the thesis is this company is here to stay and they're about to deliver something that nobody's ever done before for this particular disease. And obviously, that's just gonna compound it for the other program that they have, right? And every other program that they may release in the future, right?
yeah. As simple as it can be in some respects, there's a lot of complexity to it. I think we should always preface when we talk about some of these other people on X. In my experience, off the top of my head, I can think of one to two people that I know that are um, providing some bearish type of commentary that don't own it, don't own competitors. Sorry, don't own competitors, right? So if you're talking to someone on X that is very negative on Intelia, there's a 95% chance that that person owns Bridge Bio or Anilum in my experience, because I've talked to these people probably more than anybody because they tend to find me. And I look at what they posted, and it tends to always show that they own those stocks, which makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, if I own those stocks, I also would be um, leaning on the negative side of the competitors because I don't want my investment to go down. So it makes a lot of sense. You just wish that when you show them factual data, they would uh, return the favor and do the same and not just say crazy things
Yeah.
that aren't true. But
Well, yeah. I mean that's we've seen this with other verticals, right? I remember, unrelated to this, but really quick, like I remember during the 2020, the whole Tesla run. I remember
mhm.
people were talking about Nikolai, whatever that company was, because they had invested in it,
Yeah,
right? If you invest in that
yeah,
company, like it's kind of human nature, right? You want to protect your beliefs and you want to kind of have an echo chamber type of environment. So you're just going to repeat stuff that you think is right, and you're not going to look at anything outside of that box, right? I mean, it's kind of I see that a lot in the CRISPR landscape where I see people, especially those folks talking down on like some of these companies, like they're like invest in some sort of other biotech company or healthcare company. And um but yeah, no, I see what you mean. um
yeah.
before before I forget, because I do want to move to ATTR, but HAE, I mean, we're looking at the screen here. You say it's owned by 100%, obviously, by
Hmm.
NTLA. I've mentioned this many times in this channel that partnerships is everything, right? Partnerships is how you can get more cash in the balance sheet, how you can come and kind of core commercialize it and kind of scale, especially early on in this like space, because we're kind of really early, in my opinion, anyways, in this whole, if you call it a race of CRISPR race, right? Do you
Hmm.
suspect before 2027 that a Regeneron or some of these companies go see NTLA, say, hey, we want some of that HAE program, knowing all that data you're getting.
Yeah, I definitely think one of the levers they're gonna pull if the data is as good as I think it uh, will be selling a significant portion of like ex-US Europe type of rights for that program. That'll hopefully bring in some cash, much like Bridge Bio did the same thing with their Attruby for ATTR cardiomyopathy. Um, it'll be interesting if that deal or a separate deal also sells some US rights. I personally, the US, I feel like they could. This is not like Casgevy, right? Casgevy is a huge undertaking. The treatment center, the transplant centers that you need for that, it's a very complex process, very lengthy. A lot of people say 6 months, but they're talking 9 months. So it's like a 6 to 9 month process for Casgevy before you actually get someone dosed. Because you got to do the transplant, you got to do the chemo, you got to put the cells back in the body after they've been edited. It's a tough process. That you can understand really needing a Vertex type of like big pharma to help you get all those centers up and running. This is an outpatient. This is a 2 to 4 hour outpatient for Intelia for all their programs. It's just an outpatient drip. It's a 1 day thing. It doesn't even take a full day. It's just 2 to 4 hours. So it's very different, very much easier to like manufacture and dose. So I hope they keep 100% in the US. And I do hope that they get a really nice payday for the like Europe if they're going to give up a significant portion of those rights.
Yeah, I mean, no, that's a good point, actually. That's a really good point because I am comparing, of course, with CastJV, obviously, with what they did with Vertex, which is kind of insane at the time. Vertex gave up $1 billion cash, I think it was, to own like the additional, like, what is it, like 20%? At the time, it was like 60-40 or 50-50. I don't remember, but now it's like obviously
Yeah,
60-40 in favor
it
of
yeah,
Vertex.
it was 50-50 and they gave up 900 million upfront and 200 million upon approval, which it got approved. So it came out to 1.1 billion for 10% extra.
That's like, obviously,
Yeah.
if the program plays out long term for CastJV and um obviously that's gonna pay off. But man, that is insane. Like for Vertex to just come in, that speaks volume of like
I
confidence of those two companies.
yeah, I think what a lot of people didn't realize, and even I didn't realize at first, was that there's no way that they paid that much money just for this initial Casgevy. It must have uh, rolled into it the wave two with the Casgevy without the chemo. And I would think it even includes 10% extra of like Casgevy in vivo. And they would not answer it. I talked to the IR department for CRISPR and they would not answer me. So I think that pretty much answers the question because I think they would have answered me. And I think I even dug deeper one time and I confirmed that it was 10% for um, everything,
Wow.
10% extra. So that it makes more sense when you think of it in that context, but it's still hilarious. 10% of that is 1.1 billion, and we're looking at Intelia at at roughly 700 million market cap right now with 700 million in cash. Like less, they're way under that 1.1 billion that they got for 10%.
It's
But
insane.
CRISPR got.
That's
Yeah,
insane.
it's really crazy.
It is. It is. I mean, I understand your reasoning of not giving up percentage because of everything just explained. I understand it's the delivery and everything. You don't need 6 months and all the good stuff. But sometimes I feel like it's more related to like PR slash partnership slash, hey, look, we can get a big pharma company to give up $1 billion, I'm just giving an example, like $1 billion cash, it shows confidence. So we're not the only ones feeling good about this program. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's a it's a tricky thing. I definitely would not expect Intelia to do anything until the phase 3 data, which since it's going to be mid next year, so it's coming up. We're only 12 months away, roughly, from when we could see that phase 3 data. You're going to wait until after that or around that point so you can get maximize your payout. But it's tough when you own 100% because what are you going to do? Give up 50%? I mean, that could be very, you would need a big payday for that. It would have to be a lot of cash, right? What you could see more likely is like the ATTR program, um, Regeneron take an extra 25% and become 50-50 partners. That's not as crazy of a, you know, of a give up.
No.
Um, but I do HAE. I would not expect them to hold 100% overall. In the U.S., maybe that one I really don't know, but ex-U.S. definitely they're gonna try to do some partnerships there. I would imagine.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, like that is a surprise for me for this specific company. When I first started studying this company, I really thought they would give up a little bit more, not just for HAE, but for the ATTR as well. And that was like years ago, right? So I'm kind of surprised that that hasn't been done. Although I understand all the reasoning, I totally like obviously it makes sense to own more, like like it's just common sense, right? And they don't need to give up knowing everything you just said. But man, it would feel good to get $1 billion for like 10% of HAE. Think about it, right? Like 90% they still own it, 10% Regeneron. Not that I think they can get 1 billion, but I'm just giving an example.
Yeah,
Like it's kind of insane, right? Think about it. Like they go from 700 million cash to $1.7 billion cash just by giving a 15-20% of HAE, which again, long term kind of pays off for example, the company that ends up paying potentially Regeneron because they already have partnership with them. But I mean, I think that the stock would just skyrocket, to be honest, if that happened.
yeah. The CEO is on record thinking that the company can be positive, like not just break even or even into the green on HAE alone, uh, as of like by 2028, which is crazy because um, it's very bullish for him to come out and say that because the approval, if it's second quarter 2027, you're not going to be able to start dosing people immediately. Like it takes a little time to commercialize, not even close to as long as Casgevy, right? But it's still going to take some months to get some of that stuff, set up. So the fact that he thinks like a year and a half later, they're already going to be potentially making 300-400 million from that one, just is pretty impressive. But it's not a lot of patience. Remember, it's not you don't need a lot of patience to do that. It's going to be at least 2 million in the U.S. Um, the ATTR program, I would think, would be ballpark 2 million in the U.S. The HAE, I would expect to be a little higher because it's a lot more rare.
Right.
And the more rare it is, typically the higher it is. But I would imagine it's under 2.5. Maybe it ends up being like 2.2 and the HTTR 1.9 or 2 million. But I would imagine they're gonna be kind of similar, but it'll be interesting.
Let's let's drill down on something on HAE, and you said this before. You said about bears on S.com, a couple of people. I'm kind of curious, like what are their arguments, like their specific arguments about it, and how would you tackle each of them? like the high level. Obviously, everybody has their own like little opinion here and there, but there's
Mhm.
some recurring ones which obviously I see them coming through my own threads, and I see you replying all the time. Um, what would you say to some of their like? What would be the highlight of their arguments, and how would you respond to them?
Yeah, so HAE is a lot more complex, I would say, than the ATTR arguments. The HAE, there are a lot of drugs. So right off the bat, their argument is that there's a lot of drugs, right? That doesn't mean they're good drugs. They the bearish takes tend to assume anything that's approved is a good drug, and they're better than nothing, of course, but they're not a cure. They're not close to a cure, and you know, they can be very good for a fraction of patients that can um, not have attacks. But it's not anything close to what we're seeing with Intelia. The What was really interesting was after the phase one data that anyone could really be bearish because that phase one data was essentially perfection. It was 10 patients at three different dose levels. It was three at the low dose of 25 milligrams, four at the 50 milligram dose, which is the important dose because that's what they took forward to phase three, and three people at the 75 milligram higher dose. And out of all those people, and now we've had long-term follow-up because they've shown us a couple times on that. And next month in June, we're going to get even further follow-up on those phase one 10 patients. Um, there was one patient in the 25 milligram dose, which is lower than, again, that's lower than what we're doing for phase three. Uh, had a sports injury, so where they had a little swelling. Imagine like a twisted ankle or something like that, where you're going to have swelling naturally. And the doctor said he couldn't know for sure if it was actually an HAE attack or just normal swelling. So they had to count it. They had to count it as a minor, um, mild HAE attack,
Wait,
which
wait, wait. Hold on. I just want to make sure, like, the person pretend like had a, let's say they're playing basketball
yeah, basketball or soccer, something. Yeah.
and they mess up their ankle, whatever, and that's counted as
Yes. Yes.
that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, and this isn't me making it up. This is, the company um, described this on a actual call, one of the earnings calls or one of the data release calls. So they discussed this in decent detail. I don't know if they said what sport it was or which body part, but they did say it was a sports injury, and they did say that the doctor couldn't know for sure if it was HAE or just natural swelling from the injury. And it was very mild. It was the type of thing that if you have an injury, the guy's still going to consider himself cured. That's what really matters, right? If you're a patient, who does this matter? No. It matters how you feel if you feel cured. And I can guarantee you that patient feels cured. So that was one of the attacks they had to, and it was at a lower dose, right? So it's crazy. The other one's a little more interesting because it was at the high dose at 75 milligrams. And supposedly some woman was up on an airplane and she got proposed to. And the way the company described it, that you can imagine that's a very heightened emotional state. And people don't understand HAE. There's a lot of psychology. It's a These patients have lived in fear their entire lives, um, because I've talked to a lot of these patients. I on X I've posted multiple patient testimonials that I've like interviews that I've had with patients, And you come across people that have lost grandparents, parents, or siblings because they've died from HAE, and it is not super common, but it does. If you have a disease and there's a, let's say, a 5% chance or even a 2% chance, 2% chance might seem really small. But do you want to walk around with a 2% chance that your throat is going to have a swelling attack and you die from suffocation? Probably not, right? So there's a lot about the disease that people don't understand. And you can imagine how exciting a cure can be for that reason alone. Um, so, yeah, I mean, that's all the attacks that we've ever seen from phase one,
Right.
which is remarkable. It is interesting, how the higher dose person did have one. I would argue that's really the only attack that whole group has had because I don't think we should really count the sports injury.
No, not definitely not the sports one. I made, I think it was like it was yesterday's video actually. I talked about how I don't think people fully understand the human body like variables, how N sample, the N sample, just because you're getting someone like, I'm just giving an example, like 20-year-old woman and another
Mhm.
20-year-old woman, they're not the same. There's so many variables, right? Genetics, there's so many things that come into play that uh I mean that's the whole point of having a large sample size and going through these clinical trials, phase one, phase two, phase three. And even like I'm speaking that obviously we're in this space, we understand these things, we understand um it's never going to be like quote unquote perfect, right? There's always going to be here small adverse effects here and there. But the people coming in the space, and I've had conversations with people, and actually there was a meetup on YouTube meetup like a couple of weeks ago in Toronto from Amit Investing. He came from US here, and there was a
Mhm.
bunch of people, and they never were in CRISPR, right? They never invested in CRISPR, um, and they were asking me like these basics questions, which again, it kind of makes sense because I was asking these same questions when I got involved, right? And a lot of times, like we don't know about this space, we're looking at this data um and we don't know what's good, what's bad. I mean, it's kind of hard to navigate it. Like I know for you, it's like, and for me too, it's like, man, it's
No,
not a big deal, like the sports injury, but man, can you imagine like someone looking into that and like reading the news and like, oh yeah, this is not safe yet. This is gonna take a long time before it gets saved. Do you
it's
understand what I'm saying?
it's very hard. Um, there's a lot more research and stuff that you have to do when you invest in these companies. It's the opposite of buying fart coin, and that's why people like
Right.
to just throw their money at something and not have to think, right? People they want to go home for the summer and not stay in school, pretty much, right? So same thing, like even Tesla is a lot easier to understand. They do have more things than just cars, of course, now, right? But it's a lot easier to understand because when you talk about therapeutics, each disease has very different things going on. Like HAE and ATTR are very different. The psychology, the age of the patients, there's a lot of variables. So it does make it um, a lot of studying that someone has to do.
Would you because you said obviously um like one of the obviously a lot of folks on X um they kind of trash on NTLA and HAE their program because they have vested interests with obviously other companies or whatnot. Like, is there any argument that you're looking at and you're like, okay, well, this is kind of reasonable, but it's not like I'm not that worried, but it is kind of a reasonable bearish argument about the company. Like, is there any argument you can think of?
So I got so tired of the so many of the bearish arguments being just completely like false that I it was a lot many months ago I came up with a post that specifically told the bears what they should be saying. It was a here's the actual bear thesis that you guys should be saying to me, not what you guys are saying, because the majority of what they're saying is just not true. So I'm trying to remember what I said, but basically the number one thing we have to avoid is a major safety event, right? But that's any drug in history. You could say the same thing. The I think what most of their thought process is in their heads comes from a place of, well, you don't know what the gene editing is going to do 10 years from now, right? Now, you can understand that logic for an HAE patient. For ATTR patients, it's the logic is very flawed because, for one, if you look back at the tafamidis, which is it's for the longest time is the only ATTR CM drug in the world. It's a pill from Pfizer. It's running at about a 6 billion per year rate. I think they made 5.5 billion last year, but it keeps going up. So this year it's on pace for probably over 6 billion. But who knows how much BridgeBio? There's some more entrants that just got approved, Alnylam and BridgeBio. So we'll see if they're able to keep that share. But it's a huge market. So I think people don't understand how big it is. It's BridgeBio estimated at 15 to 20 billion peak just for ATTR-CM, not even including the polyneuropathy, which is a lot smaller, but that's a major market. So I think it all boils down to their what if. It's all about what if, um, which is funny because like you have some earlier patients that are getting to like the 5 year mark, and you start to, but now they're saying, oh, what about 10 years? What about 15 years? They're pushing the goalpost. Um, but you can understand that logic for HAE, like I said, but for ATTR, the median age in the CM trials was 78. So, uh, and the Pfizer drug, what I forgot to say was the placebo in that trial originally had a 2.5 year median survival. So basically, what that means is if you didn't get any drug, those patients only median survival time was 2.5 years. And the Bears are trying to worry about whether or not Intellia is going to have a cancer arise 10 years from now. So that logic doesn't make any sense
Agreed.
when you think of it like that. Now, there are some patients that are younger, um, especially the variant hereditary patients. Those get diagnosed a lot earlier than the wild type. The wild type's just from old age, and most of the patients are wild type from old age. So there are a lot of old patients, and that takes me to another bear point. You know, why would an insurance company uh, pay so much? For such an old patient. For HAE, it makes a lot of sense, right? It makes a lot of sense, which is nice because HAE is the first program. Hopefully, that'll prove the payers are willing to pay up for this. Um, but in my opinion, there's it's such a big market that Intellia, there's going to be a lot of patients out there that are variant patients, which their data was super impressive. For the variant patients are those hereditary ones that get diagnosed earlier. Instead of 70s or 80s, they get diagnosed 50s or 60s. So there's a lot more meat on the bone in terms of years that you can help a patient. And Bridge Bio is kind of seen as the lead on X. Bridge Bio is seen as the lead drug right now. in terms of Wall Street and the analyst, Alnylam is seen as the lead company. I think part of the analyst love for Alnylam is they expect their next gen drug, which hasn't even started phase 3 quite yet. It's supposed to for cardiomyopathy within the next month.
Right.
It's huge. It's like something like 1,400 patients.
Jesus.
They've never dosed with that drug a ATTR patient. And some people might be, well, how are they getting into a phase 3 if they've never dosed an actual patient? It's because they did like this healthy volunteer study, um, and the FDA allowed them, I guess, because their drug has so much similarity to their past two drugs that are already approved to do that, which I've never seen that before. I've never seen like, oh, here's a new drug. We'll let you do a healthy volunteer study, which is very interesting. Like they must have paid these healthy volunteers. There are people out there because I wonder, like, why would someone volunteer for a drug that's
Yeah.
never been, you know? And there's people out there that make money testing drugs,
Oh,
like
fair
people
enough.
that,
Yeah, 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 yeah. I know exactly what you mean. I mean,
yeah,
unrelated, but like when I take the subway in Toronto, like sometimes there's like ads saying if you're I don't know, like
yeah.
if you have this, you have that, you can be paid to sign up as a
Mhm.
patient.
And it's probably, this is not just some little pill, so it's probably a nice payday. You would imagine it's not going to be a few $100s. I would think it'd
No.
be in the thousands. So and it didn't take them tons of patients because each dose level they only had to do like 3 patients or something.
Right.
But they did a bunch of dose levels. I can't remember how many, but they settled on a certain dose level, and they're going to dose it twice a year. So that's going to be the number one competitor for Intelia in ATTR cardiomyopathy and polyneuropathy, but it's behind Intelia. So the way I look at it is Intelia should get approvals before we even see data from from that third gen, which
I
is good. I
Yeah, I would just add to that. Like I know you said it's kind of weird that they didn't even go through like phase 1, phase 2, straight
mhm.
into phase 3 because of their previous two drugs. It's not really clear, but I would actually add to that. That actually makes me more bullish about CRISPR because if, because again, we're not the FDA, right? I don't even know how they operate like um in the US. I mean, I'm not even American, right? In Canada, we have our own Health Canada regulatory body, but it's the same idea, right? You have this organization that oversees all of the good stuff there. If they're able to do that for that company, can't they do that for CRISPR? Because Casgevy is approved.
it
Now, obviously, Casgevy is different. Obviously, we just
yeah,
spent the whole first part talking about that. But you know what I'm trying to say? Like, what about HAE versus when HAE gets potentially approved by 2027? Next Z, can it be faster approved? Like, you see what I'm trying to say? Like, there has to be a a
the
linkage.
main
Yeah,
difference the main difference, the siRNA platform has been around for a while, long time. So they're getting the benefit of that. And CRISPR's not going to get that anytime super soon to that large of an extent. But I'm very impressed with, the FDA has been very supportive. I mean, I remember not that long ago, people were wondering if they would even, you know, approve these INDs and things like that. And um, Intelli has been really impressive with that because you've noticed other companies have had holds. Beam has had IND holds.
yeah.
Even CRISPR had an original IND hold. Intelli has never had an IND hold. They've been very successful with these programs progressing with the FDA. So I like that. But yeah, I don't think we should expect that in um, anytime soon. But eventually that could happen, which is long term. But I don't currently think of Intelia really. long term. And I think that's another bearish point now that wasn't the case so much a couple years ago, but just because of the market, and they had to shelve essentially the entire pipeline pretty much. So not having a pipeline is a bearish view that I agree with. I understand, but you're talking the price that we're at now is incredibly cheap just for these three phase three programs. I don't look at Intelia as a long term um, play, although if they start doing well, they'll have the money to reinvest in R&D and could become a long term company. But at this point, I think it's a very obvious M&A target. It's a very clean cut deal because they're running a lot more streamlined than they were before. They've cut a lot of fat out, and you're pretty much buying drugs. You're buying HAE, you're buying ATTR. A lot of companies don't really want all the riffraff. They end up cutting a lot of that stuff anyway when they acquire someone new. So we'll see. The issue is you would think Regeneron would be the number one most logical company to buy them out. Yet Regeneron is well known for being very um, they don't like to do a lot of buyouts.
That's
So
interesting. So would you say that's your prediction though? Like NTLA gets acquired? Is that what your not prediction, but what you
uh,
can see that happening more likely long term?
I don't I definitely don't expect it to happen um, anytime soon. I don't know if it's possible after the HAE readout. Um, if it's as good as I think it could be, and I'm talking more of the pivotal readout mid
Right.
next year. I would not expect any buyout for the next 12 months. That's for sure. Um, I don't know. I don't know what would happen. I think a lot of it will have to do with what the price of the stock is at the time. And it's very hard right now to know what the stock price is going to be based on the behavior of the stock recently. Um,
Yeah, no,
so
the
yeah,
stock
I'm not
the
sure.
stock market is completely uh it's completely disconnected with what's happening in the space. I think I can speak with high confidence on that. I think we've seen that.
Yeah, I think we could start questioning ourselves if we're going crazy if 90% of SMID bio, small and mid bio, weren't at historic low levels of pricing, right? It's not an Intelia specific problem. Um, People just point out stocks like Intelia because they got so high in the bubble, right? It seems worse because of the bubble. But in reality, they're right around cash. There's a lot of companies that aren't even at cash, So if you think of it that way, it's a very common. It's more common than not right now.
Would you like one of the bullet points here that you mentioned, you said physician support and you threw out some statistics here, like 75% willing to offer NTLA 2002 to all patients within the first 3 years. And then you said 89% for next Z. Where are you getting these numbers actually, like these statistics?
Yeah, anyone can find those directly on the Intelia website in their um, slides, their corporate presentation. So I didn't just make those up.
Right. No, no, no. I know. I
And
know.
yeah, but I think it's very important to clarify these stats are very different stats. You might wonder, well, why is HAE only 75? Because it says to all patients. Means the not think that HAE physicians would be willing to offer a gene editing, you know, therapy to these patients that are doing decent on these other drugs, right? And I think this is really important to show that if 75% are willing to offer to all patients, imagine how many are willing to offer it to the worst half of the patients, right? The 50% of the patients that aren't doing great still. Um, and then that 89% on the cardiologist for next Z, um, it says extremely or very likely. I mean, those are pretty pretty strong, words. So, there was a Stanford, one of the leading physicians in the world for ATTR-CM. He's from Stanford, and when the first story hit, there was like an NPR article that came out, and I think he might have been in the article. I can't remember, but he had patients reach out to him, like a lot of patients. I can't remember how many he said. Like he might have said a dozen patients that reached out saying, "When can I get this?" And this was in 2021.
Mm.
Patients with ATTR-CM, they were likely very old patients, and they were lining up based on data from three patients that all it showed was knockdown. That was the data that sent the stock to 202 4 years ago, right? It didn't show anything. It didn't show any clinical numbers like NT-proBNP, 6-minute walk test, Kansas City cardiomyopathy questionnaire, all these important clinical data points. It didn't show any of that. And these patients are very, so you can imagine. And before I forget, the other big thing that we hear from the bears are, you know, there's going to be a unwillingness to take gene editing by patients. And that's the company has said many times, that's not what we're seeing. That's not where it's very obvious from how fast they're enrolling their trials that people, they said it's over enrolled. Their HAE is essentially, there's too much desire to be in that program.
Right.
And I know personally, I've talked to patients that I don't know if I might have got a couple of those patients enrolled myself because I talked to patients that weren't aware of it. I and they said they were going to enroll after I talked to them. Like they immediately they were that excited about
Wait,
that.
sorry, I just want to double click on that. You're saying that you got in contact with them like on X.com or something, and they just like, yeah, we have
Yes.
that disease as well. That's insane. Like, it's a good thing.
Yes.
Like, that's a crazy good thing. Uh,
Yes. Yeah, the the Bears, it's so frustrating, right? Because I really appreciate the Bears that aren't invested in the competitors, right? Because they tend to be more logical and they talk about the things that really you can understand. The fact that um, there could be long-term side effects, maybe. We don't know. Okay, sure. Uh, and the fact that the ATTR patients for CM a lot of them are very old. But I do really believe that Intelia will have an opportunity to refund. They should put into some kind of clause where they refund payers something like if they do give a 80-year-old this treatment, if they live only 1 year, they have to give back 75% of the pay, and if they live 2 years, they give back 50%, and so on. And maybe it caps at 4 years or 5 years and they have to pay the whole thing. But there's ways to do it. I, and I people forget that it's not uncommon. There are like rebates that do occur based on these things. So that's an option. Um, and I think Intelli would be smart to do that if required by payers. If payers don't require, then of course just take the full amount for everybody. But I could understand payers having an issue with a big price tag if someone's like 80 years old.
Right. Fair enough. Would you so because obviously we talked about the competition and so on, and obviously it's kind of a myth at this point, with everything we just talked about. Don't you see a world where we have these, for example, HE program living and commercialized, and the next Z1 as well for ATTR, and then you have a bunch of competition, which is fine, and then everybody's just getting patients dosed and getting basically making money. Like,
Mm.
don't we see that? Because I see that with sickle cell disease, obviously. I see that. I kind of see that with sickle cell disease and beta thalassemia. I'm not saying everybody's going to get a fair share of pie, but if you ask me, and I know we spoke a little bit here earlier on Casgevy, I think Casgevy is going to be a
Mm.
success for now. Now, if you ask me in 10 years, that's a whole different discussion. But for now, for the next 2, 3 years, I think it's going to make some good money. Um, Going back to this one for NTLA, I'm trying to understand why. And I saw that back in February. I remember you were answering to one person specifically, which we're not gonna name, but they're very popular.
Huh.
Next.com starts with
I
bio,
think I know
ends
who
with
you're.
ends with
Oh,
one.
okay.
So what would you say
Yeah,
to that? Like, can we see that world, or is it really a one take? I'm trying to understand the logic there from the Bears and yeah.
yeah. It's a big reason that I I took money out of CRISPR and went to Intellia. Um, I had Beam for a long time too, right? Those were Beam and Intellia were my two for a long time. But sickle cell is going to be a lot of one and done competition. Beam and CRISPR in particular, but there's other people coming, especially when you talk about like in vivo. So what I really like about Intellia is there's no one else is going after HAE or ATTR that's one and done, right? It really gives them an advantage. Yeah, there's other modalities, but I think that's underappreciated, right? Um, and that's what patients want. The young patients, the old patients, like you would understand it from a young patient. Even I'm a little surprised how much the old patients, they really, are excited about a cure. I think people forget even when you're old, a lot of people still want to live as long as they can. No one wants to die, right? So it it's very interesting.
Yeah, I think they're one and done, no safety concerns. I think that's the big thing, I think.
It's going to be very important the next couple months because I went through. I was talking with Dirk, who you might know, RNAi analyst. He's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
popular account on X. You know, he's a very interesting story, right? I mean, even in his name, he's big on RNAi. He's big in like Alnylam, those type of companies, right? And even someone that's been so locked into that space has now become a bigger CRISPR bull. And I mean, he really Intellia, I think, might be his biggest position. Um, he's really big. I think he likes some of the other ones too. I think he likes Prime, and I think he might like Verve. Um, so that is really interesting because usually people really lock into one modality and they really think that's the best, and no one's going to change their mind. So I really appreciate his perspective because it's coming from a different place, someone that didn't start in the CRISPR space.
Right. So we only have a couple of minutes here, and I appreciate your time, Anthony. Um, how would you like just to close this out, like what would you say for anybody that's kind of looking to invest in NTLA and looking to dabble into CRISPR, like what would you say the next few important things that are happening in the next few years with NTLA? Like, how would you close this out to highly cover the company? Like, what would you say to those folks like when they studying this company?
Yeah, if we're focused just on Intelia, I mean, obviously CRISPR Therapeutics, they have a lot of stuff in the program right now, and they should really start hitting some data here in the next 12 months. It should be quite often. Um, for Intelia, next month we get super extended phase one HAE from those 10 patients. Honestly, there's not much upside for there because it's so perfect, really. You could argue there's downside, but we've already seen not just one update on that. We've seen at least two updates. So it's and they would, if something really bad would have happened, they would have told us by now. They would have had to. So um, yeah, that's not a huge catalyst, but it'll be nice to see. The big catalyst would be coming in the more towards the end of the year. Um, HAE phase two. We didn't get to talk about the phase two, but that's the important one because the stock was over 20 before they released it about 7 months ago, 7, 8 months ago. And that really drove the stock down because, like phase one, because of phase one being so perfect, everyone expected perfection. And they had 8 out of 11 that appear cured. Potentially, it was early. We'll see. Um, the other three patients, it's very important to note. And people thought, okay, if some patients have a few attacks, maybe it'll just be one or two. And they were showing a lot, but people didn't listen to the call. They didn't listen to the doctors. Even the doctors said not a single one of those attacks was a visible attack. Not a single one. The way these trials, people don't understand how the HAE trials work. If you get any kind of sore throat, any kind of tingle in your throat, anything that you think might be an attack, you have to dose, you have to treat it. You got to treat it. Um, so all those things that say they're actually attacks, none of them actually were, attacks. And the doctors said that they expect that once it's unblinded, because that had a placebo, so they didn't know they actually got the drug. So there's a lot of the psychology at play too. It's That'll be important because remember the stock was above 20 because of that data that I feel is very misunderstood. That's part of what dropped us down to where we're at now. And then you would assume that big ATTRCM 2-year update would be at the same conference in November, just like it was last year. So that would be my expectation for that. Um, I don't know if I mentioned it yet, but yeah, the HAE, I can understand how confusing that is to people, right? There's a lot of tricky differences between phase one, phase two. Phase two, not only did it have the placebo, so the patients didn't know they got the drug, but it also had a washout of their current medication. And I think what I've started to notice and is very underappreciated is when someone's got some medication already in them and then you tack on additional gene editing, it provides an even bigger punch, like even better. And we saw that in the polyneuropathy data. 5 out of the 6 patients that were progressing and getting worse on the lead drug from Alnylam were doing really, really, really well in the first 12 months on Intelia. Really well. And the patients that weren't doing the Alnylam drug didn't do so great, actually, for the first 12 months. The polyneuropathy data as a whole was way down um, by the patients that hadn't had drug from competitor.
Right.
Luckily, all those patients did really, really well in that gap from 12 months to 24, which lifted the overall averages. But yeah, it was very interesting. If people can look back if they're curious, the first 12 months, the MNIS plus 7, which is the most important data point for the pivotal trial for the FDA, we were not that good. I mean, it was comparable to Alnylam, um, but the patients that had had Alnylam's drug and were getting worse did really well that first 12 months.
Mm,
Um, so it was very, very interesting. And I think the HAE also proves that because the washout, it, I looked at if you look at the phase 2, there was 25 milligram lower dose also. We
right.
haven't talked about that. And
Yeah.
those patients showed like tons of attacks. But in phase 1, they showed nothing. And the main difference is they were washed out from their medication and they didn't know they received the drug. In the real world, you're going to know you received the drug and you're not going to be forced to be washed out. I don't believe in a clinical setting. Um, I don't think they're going to make people wash out of their drug. And I've asked people, and they tend to agree with me on that, like physicians. So in real life, it's going to look a lot more like a phase 1 than what we're seeing um, in phase 2. But I don't. I think I'm most excited for the HAE because that's the one that people don't understand, and I hope that it it's not going to change the minds of they could jump and cure every single person, right? They're still going to find something wrong with it. They're still going to say, "Oh, yeah, but they're going to have cancer in 10 years." That's what they're going to say, right? We know it already,
Yeah,
but
that's what I was gonna say. Like you could have perfect data and they're still gonna find something, right? So to me, like I'll be honest with
yeah,
you, I've always said this. To me, I'm less concerned about what bears say. Obviously, it's important to kind of understand what the naysayers are saying. To me, I'm more concerned
yeah,
about the FDA, to be honest. Like, uh, I know you said they're doing some good stuff recently, and it is true. And obviously, with the new administration, things are obviously bound to change. And obviously with CashJV being approved over a year ago, um, that kind of puts things in perspective for them, I think, regarding CRISPR, which obviously CashJV and NextZ, for example, are two different, like not just diseases, but it's like two different, like in vivo versus ex vivo, like there's whole differences there. But like for me, I'm more worried about that, to be honest. Like I know you, because obviously we're on X.com all every day. We're seeing folks respond to
yeah,
us, uh, trying to attack some of your posts and debate you. But
hmm
to me, it's like I'm more worried about the FDA. Like to me, it's like why are we waiting this long? You see what I mean? And thinking like, why are we waiting this long? Like why? Like I understand there's a process. I understand their role is to protect citizens. Obviously, they don't want to approve anything just to get things like, obviously they have to protect
hmm
citizens, right? Like with medicine and everything, therapies. I understand that part, but we know HAE, we have that amazing data from phase 1. Okay. We didn't get
yeah,
that much of an amazing data recently, or like perfection, but it doesn't matter. Like you have patients that are wanting that functional cure, right? We heard that from the leadership of
yeah,
the company. Like to me, it's like a balance, right? It's like the more we wait, the more likely patients are going to have serious long-term impacts on their bodies and then potentially be lethal. So it's like a fair balance. Like it's kind of tough, right? It's that's what I'm more worried about. I'll be honest with you. Like I'm that's like I wish there was something we could do like other than just like emailing the FDA or something like that. Like I just wish like there was more that could be done.
yeah. I think that the problem is there's already drugs that do a decent job, right? If these were diseases that had no help, no approved drugs, it probably would get approved uh, quicker. Um, but HAE, we're very close. You know, Uh, it it could be less than 2 years now from that first approval. We're going to get the pivotal data and send the BLA in about a year, and then it should take like 8 or 10 months after that. So yeah, it's sad that the PDUFA dates take so long. That's that's the number one thing I keep, pounding the table on. Like, if you have pivotal data, why is it taking sometimes close to a year to get in front of the FDA to like approve something? You already have the data. Like, it shouldn't take 10 months to review the data. And I know that, we don't fund the FDA much at all. It's very small. A lot of their money comes from the companies paying fees, which is ridiculous. Um, yeah, so we won't get into that,
Yeah,
but
it's kind of its own business, but anyways, that's a whole different topic for another day. But hey, Anthony, we'll probably end the interview here. Like, we really appreciate your time here, and I learned so much. I'll be honest, I learned so much. I'm gonna have to review the whole video here because there's some things you said that I might have skipped because I was focusing on some other things you said at the same time.
yeah,
So I need to digest all of that, but definitely, anybody watching this video should definitely follow you on X.com, Gene Investing. Any like closeout words, anything you want to end with?
yeah. There's one thing I'm in my mind. Dirk and I were talking, and um, I went to the clinical trial website. I did all the math of I counted one by one the sites for the big 765 patient cardiomyopathy trial called Magnitude. And I found out that they're averaging roughly half a patient per site per month. What that comes out to now that they're approximately 100 sites is 50 patients. They're on pace right now to add 50 patients a month, and that becomes really important if you consider safety is our. I would not worry about the FDA at all. They only come into play since our efficacy is so strong if the safety becomes the problem. So safety would be is what we got to worry about. And we're adding 50 a month. So every day that goes by that we don't get some stupid 8K
Yeah,
to tank the stock 30% after hours is a good day. It's a positive, right? Because if we're here 3 months from now talking again or whatever, and we haven't had another safety thing occur, that's big because you're getting to the point where eh, every extra 100 patients, 150, 200 patients you have dosed, very important to show that it's even less of a chance of occurring. And I'd argue it wasn't a big deal anyway, but
fair enough.
we'll
Fair
we'll
enough.
leave it there.
Fair enough. Thank you, Anthony. And again, for all the viewers, please do follow Anthony if you don't already on X.com, Gene Investing. Uh, man, I remember Anthony when you had less followers. I remember that. It was maybe my mind is blurred here, but I remember those days. It's nice. It's nice. It's a great community, the CRISPR landscape, and it's growing every day, and it's nice. But yeah.
The some of the OGs don't aren't around anymore,
I
so
know,
it's
I know. Like
it's
CRISPR
interesting.
Tommy, actually CRISPR Tommy, right? CRISPR Tommy, and I'm gonna mention
Yes.
CRISPR Tommy because I mentioned him a bunch of time in my own videos, and that's how I got in the space with Ark Invest and YouTube videos from CRISPR Tommy and back in
Hmm.
2020. So anyhow, hopefully we'll get some of those folks back in the space, and we'll go from there. So please do subscribe, like this video, guys, as always, and hopefully we do this again, Anthony.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
They expect it to be a lot better, and the company has come out and said expect it to be better. They pretty much forecasted it will be better.